The bells of the church carry a different weight when a pope dies. They no longer sound like simple calls to prayer but like echoes of history itself, slow and heavy, as though time has paused to listen. When Pope Francis passed away, that sound spread far beyond Rome. Candles flickered beneath ancient icons, priests bowed their heads in quiet chapels, and ordinary Catholics across the world sat in silence, aware that something larger than any one life had ended. An era was over, and the church stood at a threshold once again. In that stillness, a voice many had grown accustomed to hearing only in controversy finally spoke with a different tone. Cardinal Raymond Leo Burke, long restrained, often misunderstood, and deeply polarizing, broke his silence. For years his name had carried tension wherever it was mentioned. To some Catholics, he represented fidelity and courage, a man willing to stand firm when others seemed to bend. To others, he symbolized defiance, rigidity, and division. To many, he was simply uncomfortable to listen to. Yet no one could deny that he had been one of the most striking figures of Pope Francis's pontificate. And now, after the Pope's death, Burke stepped forward not with triumph or bitterness, but with a confession that surprised even his strongest critics. If you haven't subscribed, click on the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos like this, because what you're about to hear is not just news, it's a wake-up call for every heart that still believes truth should burn brighter than silence. Now grab your rosary, quiet your spirit, and let your heart listen, not just with ears, but with faith. To understand why his words mattered so deeply, it helps to return not to Rome or Vatican politics, but to a quiet dairy farm in the American Midwest. Raymond Leo Burke was born on June 30, 1948, in Richland Center, Wisconsin, the youngest of 6 children in an Irish Catholic family. Faith in the Burke household was not something discussed only on Sundays. It shaped daily life. The family prayed together, worked together, and worshipped together. Farm life taught discipline and responsibility, while the church taught reverence and awe. Mass was never optional. Prayer was never symbolic. God was never an abstract idea. Life was simple, but it was not sheltered from suffering. When Raymond was still in 2nd grade, his father, Thomas Burke, was diagnosed with brain cancer. The man who had worked the land and led the family now lay weakened by illness. Fear and uncertainty entered the home, along with questions a young boy could not yet articulate. During those months, a local priest regularly visited the Burke house. He came quietly, carrying a small PYX that held the Eucharist. Young Raymond watched as his father received communion and the room filled with a silence that felt different, deeper, and strangely full. He did not yet understand theology, but he sensed presence. Something sacred entered the house with the priest, something that changed the atmosphere completely. Years later, Burke would say those moments planted the seed of his vocation. He did not choose priesthood out of rebellion or escape, but out of awe. At 14, while many boys were dreaming of independence, Raymond entered Holy Cross Seminary in La Crosse, Wisconsin. It was a demanding choice for someone so young, but seminary life suited him. Discipline, prayer, silence, and obedience felt natural rather than burdensome. From there he went to the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., where he studied philosophy. He was drawn to questions of truth, reason, and moral law. For Burke, faith was never opposed to reason, it demanded rigor and clarity. Rome followed. At the Pontifical Gregorian University, he studied theology while living at the Pontifical North American College. He prayed in ancient chapels, walked halls that had shaped generations of bishops and cardinals, and learned that the Church was at once eternal and deeply human. In 1975, beneath the immense dome of St. Peter's Basilica, he was ordained a priest by Pope Paul VI. The moment left a lasting impression on him. He felt the weight of history and apostolic succession and understood that priesthood was not a position of influence but a life of sacrifice. After ordination, Burke returned to the United States and served quietly. He taught religion, worked in parishes, heard confessions, and celebrated Mass with careful reverence. He was not flamboyant or political. He was serious, pastoral, and deeply committed. In 1980, however, his path shifted again when he was sent back to Rome to study canon law. At first he resisted. He felt uncertain and disconnected, unsure if this was where God wanted him. An older priest noticed his struggle and offered guidance rather than criticism. That encounter changed everything. Burke discovered that canon law was not cold bureaucracy but theology lived out in the life of the Church. It was a way of defending truth, justice, and the rights of souls. He earned his doctorate and returned to the United States transformed, not only as a priest but as a jurist. Responsibilities came quickly. He became moderator of the Curia, vice-chancellor, and a trusted advisor. In 1989, Pope John Paul II appointed him the first American defender of the bond at the Apostolic Signatura, the highest court in the Church. It was an extraordinary sign of trust and recognition. By 1995, Burke was Bishop of La Crosse. In 2004, he became Archbishop of St. Louis. His reputation was clear. He was strict, unapologetic, and deeply committed to tradition. He celebrated the Latin Mass with great reverence and spoke openly about Church teachings on abortion, marriage, and the Eucharist. He argued that Catholic politicians who publicly supported abortion should not receive communion, not as punishment but as a matter of truth and integrity. Some praised him as courageous. Others criticized him as rigid. But no one ignored him. In 2008, Pope Benedict XVI called him back to Rome and appointed him prefect of the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signatura. 2 years later, he was made a cardinal. This marked the height of his influence. Then came 2013. White smoke rose from the Sistine Chapel, and Pope Francis stepped onto the balcony. The tone of the papacy changed almost immediately. Francis emphasized mercy, pastoral openness, and dialogue. When he said, "Who am I to judge?" many around the world applauded. Burke did not. He worried not about mercy itself, but about confusion and contradiction. He feared that doctrine was being softened in ways that would leave believers unanchored. At first, the tension between the two men was theological rather than personal. But theology, when lived publicly, quickly becomes personal. By the end of 2013, Burke was removed from the Congregation of Bishops. In 2014, after a synod suggested recognizing positive elements in same-sex relationships, Burke publicly said the Church felt like a ship without a rudder. Soon after, Pope Francis removed him from his role at the Church's highest court. The message was unmistakable. Yet Burke did not fade away. He continued to speak, to warn, and to resist what he believed were dangerous ambiguities. The conflict deepened in 2016 with the publication of Amoris Laetitia, Pope Francis's pastoral document on marriage and family life. Many Catholics welcomed its tone of compassion. Burke saw it as a source of confusion, especially regarding communion for divorced and remarried Catholics. Believing centuries of church discipline were being blurred, he and 3 other cardinals submitted a dubia, a formal request for clarification, directly to the Pope. The Pope did not respond. Months passed, and the silence weighed heavily. Burke then spoke publicly, warning that unresolved ambiguity was harming the faithful. He even suggested that a formal correction of the Pope might become necessary. To many, this was shocking. A cardinal openly questioning the Pope's teaching was almost unheard of. Burke insisted he was acting out of obedience to truth, tradition, and Christ. The rift widened further. In 2018, Burke stated that a pope could be disobeyed if he acted contrary to divine law. Supporters saw him as a watchman guarding the faith. Critics saw him as destabilizing and divisive. The Vatican watched closely. In 2019, during the Amazon Synod, Burke again objected to what he saw as theological compromise, particularly the integration of indigenous spiritual elements into Catholic worship. He warned against pantheism and opposed proposals for married priests and expanded roles for women. His language was firm and uncompromising. Then came the pandemic. Burke publicly opposed COVID vaccines developed using stem cell lines and warned against government overreach, repeating conspiracy claims that alarmed many. Ironically, he later contracted COVID himself and became critically ill, spending time on a ventilator. Some believed this experience might soften his stance. It did not. He recovered and continued to defend the Latin Mass after Pope Francis restricted its use in 2021, calling the changes severe and questioning the Pope's authority to impose them. The tension reached its peak in late 2023. After Burke publicly criticized Pope Francis's support for blessings for same-sex couples and communion for divorced Catholics, the Pope acted decisively. Burke's Vatican apartment was taken away, and his monthly stipend was withdrawn. The decision was quiet but clear. Rumors spread that the Pope had called Burke his enemy, but Francis later denied this, insisting the decision was not personal but aimed at preserving unity. Burke did not apologize. He simply said he had a duty to speak. Then Pope Francis died. And in the days that followed, Burke spoke again, this time not with warnings, but with reflection. Many expected vindication or triumph. Instead, they heard sorrow. Burke spoke of regret, of long nights before the Blessed Sacrament, questioning whether his words had always built up the Church or sometimes wounded it. He said he never wished to divide the Church, only to protect it. That confession reframed everything. The conflict no longer looked like a struggle for power, but like a tragic clash of sincere visions. Now, as the Church prepares for a new conclave, Burke's name has returned to conversation. At 76, he is eligible, though far from certain. His presence forces the Church to face its deeper questions. Should it emphasize strict clarity or pastoral openness? Should definition come before compassion, or can they walk together? As the faithful wait for white smoke to rise once more, the legacy of Pope Francis and the witness of Cardinal Burke stand like two pillars, tense and unresolved, yet part of the same Church. And perhaps that tension itself is the story, because the Church has never moved forward by agreement alone, but by grace. The real question is not who will win, but who will listen, and what kind of Church will emerge from the silence. If this message touched your heart, like this video and share your thoughts in the comment or comment Amen and stay with us. More Eucharistic stories, deeper reflections, and holy insights are on the way. May Christ in the Eucharist be your light, your rest, your truth. Amen.